Hi, I'm going to speak about the message of emotions from the micro to the macro. And this is part of an ongoing series on the power of emotions in organizational development. To begin this discussion, I'm going to refer to the ubiquitous pattern of sustainable progress that's captured by the journey that a seed makes in becoming a flower. So we have a seed, becomes a stalk, and then a flower. This is a journey characterized by three phases. So the very first phase, characterized by the seed, it's all about, the impulse is all about maintaining the status quo, and I'll refer to this as the physical phase. When the process of germination begins, there's increased activity and, in fact, a higher degree of vitality and even perhaps aggressiveness. I'll refer to this as the vital phase. And then in the third phase, the intent that was inherent in the seed becomes apparent as the flower, and I'll refer to that as the mental phase. And this is a pattern of sustainable progress that we see in any kind of organization, regardless of scale and regardless of complexity, and it occurs in time. Now, the very same pattern can occur in space as a tightly bonded structure that is comprised similarly of three components: the physical, the vital, and the mental. So we have the physical, the vital, and the mental. And in the emotional sphere, what we have is the vital component that's characterized by a feeling that draws attention to a deeper driver. That's a mental component that is responsible for the feeling, and this feeling and driver occupies space and processing capacity. So it's space, that's the physical component, and really create filters on how we perceive ourselves in the world. So this is occurring in space. Now, I had already considered in the last couple of weeks what a range of emotions or states of being are in the individual being. So in the individual, we arrived at a kind of a dashboard that was also created through looking at this pattern of the seed becoming a flower. So we have this dashboard that occurs that has the physical, the vital, and the mental, and there's both negative and positive feeling. So for example, on the negative side of the physical, we may have had a weakness or inertia, boredom or depression, and on the positive side, these may become strength, stability, flexibility, durability, and so on. And on the vital side, we may have emotions or states of being such as fear, hesitation, haste, anger, selfishness, and these may become, on the positive side, courage or sure action, calm, a feeling of love, a feeling of selflessness. And on the mental side, we may have negative states or emotions characterized by anxiety, mental noise, obsessive thoughts, compulsive or perturbing thoughts. And on the positive side, these may become peace, the ability to synthesize, to see holistically, experience holistically, well-being, and so on. So we have a dashboard of various states that occur at the individual level, and we also saw that at a team, or in fact a small collectivity, at the level of a team or the small collectivity, we similarly have a journey characterized by the seed to the flower, in which we can see different patterns of emotions. And so I will display this by 4 different emotional dashboards, if you will, and similarly the physical, vital, mental. And here at the very first stage, so at the more physical or seed stage, we may experience a state that's characterized by the physical negative. Primarily, as we move in this journey, it may morph into the vital negative. So that becomes the second phase, and this, by the way, perhaps in common terminology, the first stage may be called forming, the second storming, and then there's a quantum leap if the work is done, and what this emotional dashboard will look like is something characterized by the mental positive, and this perhaps is the norming stage, and finally this may morph into a dashboard where we have the positive states of the mental, the vital, and the physical that are more dominant, and this may be the performing stage. So we see a certain progression of emotions that occurs even in a larger collectivity. And now when we think about an even larger collectivity, something that's made up of, say, a number of business organizations or in fact markets, what we can look at, so I'll term this markets, and here if we look at the pattern of what's happening over time, I'll characterize this by two axes. The vertical axis would be, say, the investment activity, and the horizontal axis, time. And what we would typically see is, say, activity that may be of this nature. So it's quite stochastic, it's variable, it's unpredictable to a degree. But if we look at the nature of each of these curves, if you will, what we will see is that, just taking a random curve here, is that this upward motion here is characterized by an emotion which I would call greed, and this downward curve is characterized by an emotion called fear. So I would hypothesize that the activity in irrational markets across any market across the globe currently is characterized by this notion of greed on one side and fear on the other. And what this means is that there's irrationality that is characterizing how this market operates. There's a lack of predictability. There's social instability as a result of it. For example, investments can rush into a place, create bubbles around hypothetical assets, and then burst and create a lot of displacement, social displacement. So there's a high social and environmental cost that's occurring as a result of this kind of activity. And if we are able to remove this component of greed and fear that is driving the activity of this market over time, what we might see instead, so if I were to just hypothesize that we have a flower model as well, and this market activity is typified by this stock or vital phase in this ubiquitous model of sustainable progress, then if you were to reach more of the flower mental level and be able to address the greed and the fear, what we might see instead is a very different kind of market behavior. And for instance, in an agricultural economy, what we might see is on the same two axes, investment and time. And if we have an agricultural economy, we might see something very stable, very predictable, cyclical, driven by the nature of the seasons. And similarly, if we had a society or market that was extremely innovative in terms of its internet technologies, we might see something of this nature, quicker cycle and upward leading. Or if we had a product or service or a market that was out of time, so it had now become unaligned with the needs of the time, what we might see is a behavior like this, where there's a rapid decline in the investment activity, but it's cyclical and it's predictable. So instead of this kind of randomness that had typified this market behavior, what we're seeing now is very distinct curves describing different natures that are very predictable, that are rational, that are predictable, and that allow a much greater degree of stability, because there's no such thing as sudden bubbles being created. There's no hypothetical assets that are drawing funds to it irrationally. And what we will also see in this kind of collectivity is the cornerstones of financial theory, for example, like the efficient market hypothesis and portfolio theory, actually working the way that they say that it's going to work. And by the way, this efficient market hypothesis and portfolio theory simply don't work in this kind of market. And unfortunately, most of our global systems and all our financial markets are of this nature, but we're using this kind of theory to try and understand this, which simply doesn't make any sense. So what we see here is that if, again, we are able to address these emotions of fear and greed that are very typical of this middle region, then we arrive at something, a behavior of a much larger collectivity that's of a much more ordered fashion. So stepping back from all of this, if we ask ourselves, what really is the message of emotions? And to set the message or the context, I'll go back to this pattern of sustainable progress that's true of any kind of organization, regardless of scale, regardless of complexity. And if we find ourselves, what negative emotions really tell us, whether it's at the individual level or team or business or larger market level, it tells us that we're stuck at a certain level. And whether it's fear and greed that we're focused on, or whether it's depression and anxiety or anger, or whether it's being stuck at the forming or storming stages, what these emotions are telling us is that we have stagnated in our journey and that we need to do the work to cross over and to complete this journey that's essential, that's in the imprint of the DNA of life. And the way that we complete this journey is by deconstructing all the tightly bonded structures that occur in space. So what I had drawn attention to earlier, and when we do this, we will find that in fact there's a reality of abundance that is behind everything, and emotions, the negative emotions, are just a signal or a signpost or a compass telling us that we have stagnated in our journey toward this abundance. If we reach this reality of abundance, we will find there an infinite peace, an infinite love, and infinite knowledge. And this will be true regardless of the scale of organization and complexity of organization. So regardless of whether it's at the individual team or larger market level.